All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday, November 14th meeting of Humboldt Waste Management Authority. I will go ahead and take roll. Director Jones?
Here.
Director Castellano?
Here.
Director Katie?
Here.
Director Bushnell?
Good evening.
And Director Wilson?
Here.
And I am here as well. So let's get started. Start with the consent calendar. I am going to pull item F off the consent calendar. Does any other member want to pull anything out? Nope.
Thank you, Chair. So, unfortunately, it looks like staff did not attach the appropriate documents for item 2F, and I would ask that the board direct staff to bring that forward at the January meeting.
So directed. All right, I will entertain a motion for the consent calendar.
I'll make a motion to accept the consent calendar minus 2F and that to return in January.
I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion by Director Bushnell and a second by Director Katie. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Oh, does anybody have any public comment on the consent calendar? I apologize. No? Okay. Out of practice. All right, it is time for oral and written communication. Does anybody in the public wish to address the board this evening? Anybody on Zoom?
Seeing none.
All right, I will close oral and written communication. And we'll move to item 4, which is to receive proposed timeline and draft request for proposal for organics processing feasibility study. And can we get a staff report?
Thank you, Chair. So, as noted in the staff report, I'll be presenting a proposed timeline and critical pathway for an organics processing feasibility request for proposal, or RFP. This is a brief overview of this presentation. We're going to touch on the general purpose and intent of the RFP. We will go over the mainline goals of the RFP from a high-level perspective. Then we will touch on the timeline and the RFP process. And finally, we will walk through a truncated version of the critical pathway for the RFP and its deliverables. The purpose of the RFP is pretty straightforward. Its main goal is to produce a study that will look at the feasibility of implementing organics processing that will include food waste into the current waste management systems that we currently have here in Humboldt County. This is the first step in bringing this type of processing facility to the area, and obviously this is driven by SB 1383 regulations. In concert with the main goal of the RFP, I'll briefly touch on some other high-level goals and deliverables we can expect to come out of this process. While this is not all-inclusive, this hits on the larger points at hand. The study developed will touch on future plans, including population growth, potential changes in collection methodology, while taking a look at the current infrastructure that is in place and in use today. It will focus on financial outlooks relating to facility and its preparations, and provide models for costs along with approaches to altering or modifying the current waste management fee structure to ensure costs are covered correctly. This will also mitigate the need for subsidies from the solid waste tipping fees or other subsidies. Additionally, it will assess potential feedstock materials along with regulatory requirements and end-use products. And along with that, it will look at potential material markets for those end-use products that we produce. This is the proposed timeline for the RFP process. The RFP initial release would be January 10th of 2025 after the final document is approved by this board at their January meeting. There will be a pre-proposal conference with any potential proposers so they can familiarize themselves with the current infrastructure in place and ensure they have the bandwidth to take on this potential task if awarded. The deadline to submit questions will be in mid-February. This will include any and all questions asked at the pre-proposal conference, as well as any additional questions asked throughout the process up until this date. Final proposals are due to the authority by March 20th by 3 p.m. After that, the HWMA Evaluation Committee will begin evaluating all proposals and using the scoring matrix that is in the RFP. Once a proposer is selected, the committee and their recommendation will return to this board for final approval. Once finally approved, negotiations with the successful proposer will then commence in May, and a final agreement brought back before the board at their June meeting, with the intent of work beginning no later than July of 2025. One item to note here is there is not currently a draft contract attached to the RFP. Staff is still developing this item, and once finalized and reviewed by General Counsel, it will be included in the final draft RFP that will be presented to this board in January. Now I'm going to touch on the critical pathway for the RFP and the beginning stages of planning for the potential facility. The first step, obviously, is here tonight for this board to receive the first draft of the RFP and this presentation. Once direction is received here tonight, staff will circulate the document to jurisdiction staff for comment for approximately a month. Once comment is received, discussed, and incorporated as needed, staff will return with the final draft document and present it to the board at their January meeting for final approval. As noted in the previous slide, the HWMA will then receive all proposals by March 20th of 2025. The HWMA Evaluation Committee will recommend a proposer to this board at their April 2025 board meeting. Once a successful proposer has been chosen, staff will again begin contract negotiations and return to this board no later than the June meeting for final agreement approval. Once approved, staff is hopeful work can begin on or before July of 2025. Staff anticipates the work taking potentially up to a year, but will update the board as needed with more extensive update at the halfway mark, taking place at the January of 2026 board meeting. Staff is hopeful that all work related to the RFP and the study can be completed by June of 2026. If that happens, the final report will be presented to the board at their July 2026 meeting. At this time, with the knowledge gleaned from the report, they can provide direction to staff to move forward with an in-county processing facility with more specific goals, timelines, and things for us to work towards. Should the board provide direction and wish to move forward, development of the facility should begin somewhere in the fiscal year 26-27 calendar fiscal year. The board should keep in mind, though, that at this time, these dates on the latter half of this pathway are tentative and subject to change. So, finally, this brings us to the recommended action. That the board receive the presentation outlining the proposed timeline and critical pathway for the request for proposals for organics processing feasibility study, and direct staff to return with the finalized draft document for review and approval no later than the January 2025 board meeting. And as always, staff would be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, who has questions?
Just a quick question. The thing that comes up for me looking at this is just the opportunity potentially for the proposal to address, kind of emerging industries, and I know that's kind of hinted in or mentioned in here briefly, but do we want the proposer to? I guess I'm curious about having, a little bit more depth around, potential coalesced efforts with, for sure, like Nordic Aqua Farms, but, maybe the wind industry, not totally sure on that, but.
Sure. I think one of the biggest things staff struggled with developing this RFP, and we're hopeful that member agency jurisdictions who may be involved more closely in some of those projects can help us as well with comment, is we didn't want to pigeonhole this RFP, especially the feasibility study. We are not experts by any means in Nordic and how that's going to play into a potential organics facility. We certainly see potential for them having a great impact, but the conversations that HWMA staff has had with them, at this time, that timeline for them is so far out that it would be difficult for us to put something into an RFP that makes sure a potential proposer focuses on that specific entity, especially with the amount of impact that they potentially could have. So we struggled to make sure that we defined what we're looking for, but make sure that we leave enough opening so that a successful proposer can give us a broad scope on the feasibility of all potential organic processing options.
That makes sense. Thank you.
So is this RFP timeline, is it still putting us like way behind where we are supposed to be?
Yeah, we are currently, so I shouldn't say we, the jurisdictions are currently way behind already. This is certainly not going to help, but what I am hopeful that it does do is give the jurisdictions something to talk about with CowerCycle, and put on their corrective action plans that shows that we are making good faith efforts as jurisdictions, as a county, to try and come in compliance. I know that we've had some issues in the last year with working towards compliance, and the jurisdiction staff that I've talked to feel that this will be a very big bargaining chip with CowerCycle on movement forward. So while we may not be in compliance right now, we are clearly working and making efforts towards that compliance. And that's, at the end of the day, at least in my opinion, that's what CowerCycle wants to see, especially from smaller rural areas where we're impacted more greatly, not only financially, but just geography wise as well.
Through the chair. What, I should know this, but when is the date for compliance?
So the date for compliance, depending on your jurisdiction, was 2021, 2022, 2023.
And so some of the jurisdictions, I think Rio Dell they're exempt. Is that correct?
So they have waivers. They're not completely exempt from everything. So
Okay.
the jurisdictions that I know offhand are Blue Lake, Rio Dell, Ferndale, and Trinidad.
Okay.
And so they have waivers for certain requirements of SB 1383, and
Right.
those are good till 2025 unless re-upped. They can be extended to 2027, I believe. I would have to double check that exactly.
Okay.
But they're not exempt from all requirements. They're only exempt from certain requirements of 1383, mainly around the collection of food waste, organic material, processing, things like that. They still need to meet the minimum requirements of notifications, of getting prepared to do that. They just have a little bit more time because of their small rural nature. They're allowed to take a little bit more time for collection.
How, if I may, how, for unincorporated smaller areas of Humboldt, what are the rules for, like, say, Garberville or Willow Creek or those small rural areas?
So Director Matson would be a better person to talk to. And I know a little bit offhand, but him and Mr. Ezra as well in his department have worked very closely with CowerCycle. But I do know that certain parts of unincorporated county also qualify for exemptions or waivers. But again, I can't speak directly to it because I think they alter a little bit more than a physical jurisdiction that is under the requirement.
we get reports, but I was just wondering what your thought basis was on that. So just kind of bring in with Humboldt County being one jurisdiction like Rio Dell or Ferndale. So just the thoughts around that.
I think the county is in a very specialized spot because they have density locations that you are going to be required, or you technically already are required to be compliant. And then you have areas where it is incredibly financially difficult and operationally wise. Mr. Nelson from Recology, I'm sure, would be more than happy to talk about the operational challenges of collecting food waste in some of our rural areas.
Yeah.
So the county definitely has a very heavy lift in ensuring they meet 1383 requirements, because at some point eventually everyone in your jurisdiction is going to have to be compliant, and that's going to be a tough task for sure.
Yeah, it's very challenging for rural areas for sure. Thank you.
Is the RP also going to include scoping sites for potential?
So that is something that we can add into the RFP. We don't have it in there now as physically scoping sites within Humboldt County. We do have something in there that would tell us the size requirement for different processing. So an anaerobic digester is going to take less room than an in-vessel composter, or windrows is going to take more room than an in-vessel. So there are requirements tied to that where it's square footage or acreage, but we don't have something currently in the RFP that would request a proposer to look physically at Humboldt County to find property.
So we are going to look at things like digesters and whatnot as possibilities.
So as of right now, the staff has written the RFP as open-ended as possible to include all potential organics feasibility, so that way everyone has the opportunity to assess what they feel is not only best for their jurisdiction, but the waste management system as a whole going forward for Humboldt County.
Have other counties had an RFP for studies like this, and
Yes,
were they
yeah.
helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be remiss if I did not say staff did not write this completely from scratch. We definitely took our lead from several other jurisdictions and larger. SLO had one, but again, we're talking, they did this in 2018. They did this a long time ago. So we benefit from a lot of their experiences, but obviously, like Director Bushnell said, we're a little bit behind as well.
That RFP doesn't not, they have to complete that task here in Humboldt County. They can't truck that, the organic matter out.
So they can, and that was part of the critical pathway that Edgar and Associates, Mr. Evan Edgar is here as well tonight. He can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like. But originally we created a critical pathway for compliance with SB 1383. And the goal originally was in the short term, so from year 1 to year 3 to 5, depending on how long it would take us to get an in-county, we would put out an RFP, and HWM actually did put out an RFP for out-of-county processing of organic materials. Mm-hmm. That RFP was awarded to Cold Creek Compost in Willits, but unfortunately right now, we are unable as jurisdictions to collect that material and bring it to the Hawthorne Street transfer station. That was obviously a big pull as to why we closed the Eureka Recycling Center and why we applied for a grant that we did receive, $2.8 million to retrofit that facility to take organics for processing to send out of county. So this was supposed to be a two-prong approach to compliance. One, to get the jurisdictions as compliant as possible, as early as possible by sending it out of county. And then that would give us time to look at in-county processing. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we've been unable to do the first step, the out-of-county processing, due to a multitude of issues. And we need to start in county. It's not going to be quick. Building a facility like this is not going to be a 1-year deal. So we need to start this as soon as possible. And in speaking with jurisdiction staff, we felt that now is the time that we need to make sure that we start this.
Do we have an idea if an RFP was awarded to someone that was going to be, say, the materials were going to be trucked out of Humboldt County for, however long, say, foreseeable future? What does that look like with holding capacity here, and how much travel up and down the road would happen? Is it several trips a day, or? No,
so it wouldn't be several trips a day. So right now, based off the waste characterization study that HWMA did in 2021, you're looking at all told 100% capture rate, 30,000 tons. You're never going to get 100% capture rate, so let's say 20,000 tons.
Okay.
Some people are going to backyard compost. Some people are going to take it to local composters. Some people are just going to throw it in the trash.
Right.
But in retrospect, so you get a better understanding, that's about 3 trucks a day or 3 trucks a week.
Okay.
So in comparison to the transfer station, which does around 100,000 tons annually, we do 10 trucks a day, 352 days a year, give or take. And so it's not so much the bandwidth of the roads or the bandwidth of the trucks. It would be costs, very simply. It would cost a lot of money because, one, we don't have the tons like we do for solid waste to spread those costs over. And 2, it's harder to negotiate contracts for trucking with such few tons and such few trips. It's harder to negotiate with end use facilities for a better rate because, again, the tons are low. It makes it more difficult for out of county. It's just financially, it's very difficult to stomach, and it would most likely be more costly than solid waste currently is.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yep.
Who makes up the evaluation committee?
So that is yet to be determined, and I'd be more than happy to receive direction on that. But in general, we normally have 2 HWMA staff and then 2 staff from member agency jurisdictions. That's normally how we do it. Normally as well, the executive director is not on the committee, but I will be on it for this one. Just with my background and with my knowledge of organics, I thought it fitting. So Director Heacock is actually going to serve as the executive director in my place for this RFP.
And I feel like I might have seen like an SB 1383 update on one of my future agendas in Arcata. Is this something that HWMA is going to come talk to jurisdictions about, or is it something that like my environmental service director is going to give us updates on?
So I'm assuming that it's going to be your environmental services director, because I'm not currently aware of it, but the offer is always there. HWMA is more than happy to come to any of your meetings to speak to your boards or your city councils. And we are always more than happy to do that as well, or provide support to your jurisdiction staff should they need it.
Yeah, thank you for this report and getting this moving in our county. On page 9, I noticed that there are certain areas, for instance, Fortuna does not have a place on this board right now. And Willow Creek, Weot, that area does not either. And what I'm wondering is, we are currently looking at possibly Fortuna being on our board. I know that's in negotiation. I don't know how far along that is. Maybe you can answer that. And then the other thing is, how do you plan to outreach to these specific areas if they're not here at the board meetings and they don't have actual incorporated cities or city councils or anything like that?
So I'll answer both parts. So HWMA is still in talks with not only the city of Fortuna, but the city of Trinidad as well, becoming member agencies. Unfortunately, and also congratulations to Mr. Perry. He is now the new city manager of the city of Arcata. So I am relaying a little bit of the groundwork and bringing the interim city manager for the city of Fortuna up to speed on what we had worked on. But that is still continuing forward. As far as the second part, because they're not member agencies, obviously we do not have flow control over the material, but we do work incredibly well with their franchise haulers and the jurisdiction staff as well. The other thing is quite simply, if they want to bring their material to our facility, they bring it as we would take it. So if we have a process that we are going to undertake for organics processing, they're going to need to make sure that if they want to bring their material to us, that it meets the standard that we require of our jurisdictions. That would be no different than anything else. It's the same thing with trash. If they wanted to bring trash to us, they would be required to bring it just like we require our member agency jurisdictions. Now, the fees and the costs could be different because they are not member agencies, and that's something that we are going to be looking at, and especially we're going to be looking at it with this feasibility study, with the changes we're going to need to make to the waste management fee structure. But yeah, as far as the material itself, HWMA will develop the process that we're going to do. We're going to work in concert with the jurisdictions to do education and outreach, and that same thing would be passed to non-member jurisdictions.
Just to update you, Amy Nelson has been appointed permanent city manager.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, for Fortuna.
I'm going to send it out to public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item?
Good evening. My name is Evan Edgar, 10,005 N Street, Eureka, California. I was here last night at the Planning Commission. They approved my mini subdivision. So I have 2 nights in a row up here. So good to see everybody again. Edgar Associates prepared the roadmap, SB 1383 roadmap, a couple years ago. And there were some commitments in that roadmap that we recommended, and that and I'm still working in Humboldt County on behalf of the city of Ferndale. Jay does a great job over there, and he's committed to do some type of community compost in Ferndale, as well as we worked on a zero waste plan audit for the county fair. Large venues need to have some type of plan. So we did an audit this year. And so next year we're looking at some way to work with Recology and Ferndale in order to have the county fair be a zero waste event. So I'm up here a lot. I love coming up here. As part of the roadmap, one of the commitments was to encourage backyard composting, especially in the rural areas as much as possible. And the second was community composting, especially with collection for low population has been deferred till 2027 for the cities and the unincorporated low population areas. There was a bill this year in Sacramento, AB 2902 by Wood, that had the rural communities deferred till 2037. Humboldt didn't fit in as a rural community by statute in a sense of solid waste disposal, so you didn't get to enjoy the 2037 deferral, but you still have collection starting in 2027, and you still have to do edible food recovery, procurement, outreach, and education. And Edgar Associates is working with Abound up here and on a regional plan for edible food recovery, and that's been doing quite well, where there's a fair share amount of contribution from each jurisdiction going to the edible food recovery plan. So that's going well. And procurement, there's easy ways to get procurement nowadays. But without collection starting until 2027, Director Keller is correct. It's tough to get a program going and transfer the material down to turn that off. Sorry about that. So it's tough to transfer the food waste if you don't have a program on collection. And I heard there's an impasse on collection up here right now, so that's something to only delay stuff. What Eric did mention was a substantial effort that the jurisdictions are making to do something up here. So keeping CalRecycle informed is a great thing to do. So having this RFP out is the right thing to do to show progress, to have substantial progress. With collection deferred, that's why there's a great opportunity for community compost. I actually met with the city of Trinidad as well. They're looking at community compost. And throughout the state, I've worked on grants, $5 million worth of grants for community compost. There's a great opportunity to do this on an interim. If you can't get collection going, there's an impasse, there's no reason to do nothing. That's why I'm proud of Ferndale and Jay to want to do something on community compost and vermicomposting. One of the commitments in the roadmap was to keep everything in county. Right now, your food waste is going to Medford. It could be going to Ukiah, but keep it in counties is important. One of the things I work on statewide with the Rangeland Trust, I do carbon farming with the cattle guys. Right now, I'm working on 4 different projects throughout the state, from Sacramento to Yolo Land and Cattle, Santa Barbara, and Ventura, where you take clean green and we take out to the ranches and we compost on the ranches at 30,000 tons a year of green waste. It's easy to do. That's one of the roadmap items that I promoted. And I was going to work with a farm bureau. I met with them during the county fair to talk about what ranches out there would like to do carbon farming. And when you carbon farm, you sequester the carbon in the soils, you get 30-40% water retention, less erosion, greater yields, better cattle feed, happy cattles, better biodiversity, pollinators. So all the case studies I'm working on statewide are doing quite well. So carbon farming is a future, and work on carbon credits for about $15 a ton to allow the rancher to have some benefit of not only having better ranches and better rangeland restoration, but getting some incentive funding. I've just got the contract for the city of county of Siskiyou. I'll be doing the same thing in Siskiyou County next door to bring carbon farming up north. With the grant we got, Edgar Associates got you a $2.7 million grant to make the Hawthorne Street transfer station as a hub, because all the stuff goes there, all the collecting goes. It's a great facility, and that $2.7 million will fix the doors, fix the floor, and bring in any type of processing equipment to clean up the organics. And there's ways to separate out the food waste from the green waste. So with clean green, you can take the clean green material out to the farm and keep that in Humboldt County. Great program. On the food waste, you can slurry the food waste, and that's what the grant's for. And you can take the slurry food waste to wastewater You can take it to dairy digesters, and Miranda's were looking at that for a while. You can take it to animal feed. Recology was working with Chapol Farms and with the Nordic farms in order to take all the food waste and the fish waste, and you have different soldier fly technology to have the soldier flies eat the food waste, make the larvae screened out, and it's fish food. So that was being looked at, and that was in the roadmap. So a lot of things are in the roadmap, a lot of good opportunities, but I think having the Hawthorne Street as your hub to make feedstocks for carbon farming for fish food is a great plan. As Edgar Associates, I plan to bid on this. That's why I'm here today as well. It's due starts January 2025, and those ideas, I'm committed to implement them. That was a good idea back then, good ideas today. But meanwhile, I hope to bring community compost to Ferndale and Trinidad, and I hope to have Recology go along with those programs because nobody wants to step on the worm guy. Nobody wants to.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Well, now I gotta talk. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think what Mr. Edgar said, there's a lot of grassroots solutions that I think that people have taken it upon themselves to do the right thing, right? Whether that's people picking it up on bicycles in Arcata, right? Or people that have property and they can compost themselves. And so, at the end of this thing, right, the ideal solution for Humboldt County is to have our own processing facility, right? Our own circular economy, if you will. You buy it, you eat it, you don't finish it, it gets composted, it turns into compost, it goes to a farm here. That's the beautiful cycle that we want. And I think that once we get there, it might be a lot more challenging than it sounds. It might sound a lot nicer than it's going to feel. But once we get there, I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities, like, with Nordic Aqua Farms, with other companies that could potentially be, you can build so many amazing things to turn green waste into energy, you can sequester carbon, you can, grow new crops with it. And I think that we all in the industry, we love those because those are the shiny pieces. Those are the things that make us feel good about doing it. And then you have the 27 unit apartment complexes, right? And you need an industrialized solution to be able to do the shiny pieces. Like San Francisco is a good example. They have, the artisan residency program. They have all these other individual programs that they're nice programs. They're really cool programs to have, but they have a massive industrial solution for the 99 or 95% of people. And so I think that somewhere in between the industrial solution of how do we handle the 20,000 tons or 18,000 tons, and then we find these really interesting ways to handle the remaining tons, but maybe outside of windrows and finding opportunities to do that. So I think that this is the right direction here, and I think that as you guys go forward, that I think that we're heading in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anybody on Zoom that wants to make comment?
Seeing none, Chair.
All right, I'll bring it back to the board. Any other comments or questions?
I just have another thing I wanted to talk about. So when you talk about composting in the rural areas, or even if you do a compost site within city limits, I'm always curious about bringing wildlife into the areas and what that looks like. And I guess because we don't have in this RFP, there won't be a site, it won't be site specific. But just curious too, with some of the incorporated areas. Also, I know discussion at the Board of Supervisors has been in the unincorporated rural areas, how to not attract bears and wildlife to come into those compost sites. So I think I'm hopeful that we can also find a solution for that in the future.
Thank you. And yeah, a couple of things I was thinking could be good to include would just be a general assessment of opportunities with emerging and established industries. And then, and I was thinking about this before the public comment, but I appreciate the public commenters, talking about sort of these like community compost, micro compost efforts. And I know that there's both challenges and opportunities to those, working with those, especially in the sense of, you have people who are like, I'm composting at home, but, there's not a means to actually go out and regulate whether people are composting at home, or or whether that's causing problems with rodents, or or things like that, right? And so I think it would be good just to have some part where we're asking the proposal to include potential kind of challenges and opportunities related, or coalesced efforts related to composting or community composting. And I did appreciate Chair Matthews bringing up the idea of scoping sites. I think it might be useful or efficient to go ahead and, I don't know if it would make it untenable, but to start to talk about potential sites for composting facilities, and, for sure thinking about the transfer station as one of those. And I'm sure y'all are already aware, there's just a couple of little things here on some of the pages from other RFPs that, in terms of like bringing this as a sample, that will just be edited out in time.
Director Castellano, to touch on the ability for jurisdictions to go look and see if people are backyard composting. So I can't speak directly for each jurisdiction because I believe some of you are doing it differently. But if people are going to be in an area that has mandatory collection, there is an opportunity for jurisdictions to develop a waiver program, but there are requirements for that waiver program that makes that individual prove that they are backyard composting. And I know I know the city of Eureka is developing one, and I also know the city of Arcata is developing one as well. I can't speak to the other jurisdictions, but so there is a methodology and a metric to be able to do that as well.
Sorry, just quick follow-up question. This is something I've wondered about with that, is that, because I know one of the things that makes this work in terms of the collective effort is amount of compost generated, right? Mm-hmm. And so do you foresee any potential problems with these waivers? I definitely support them, and also have some,
So it's difficult for me to say right now because it's hard to judge how much buy-in you're going to get. There are individuals that already compost and they're going to keep composting. There are individuals that will look at this and want to start composting, but there is a majority of the population that just can't compost. Additionally, a majority of the food waste tonnage is going to come from businesses, restaurants. Restaurants are not going to be backyard composting. So while the residential backyard composting, HWMA is fully in support of, we're fully in support of the jurisdictions doing that as well. We currently don't see that as a huge hurdle or a huge drop off to tons. Now, I can't guarantee that because it's not a program that we've ever had here. So it's hard to make predictions on how impactful that will be. But I do know that restaurants are not going to be doing it. And that is where the lion's share of our food waste tonnage is going to come from.
So what do you need from us? Do you need a motion or?
All I need is to have you guys direct staff to return with the finalized draft document for review and approval no later than the January 2025 board meeting or staff's recommendation.
Turn this on. I make a motion that we receive the presentation outlining the proposed timeline and critical pathway for the request for proposal for organics processing feasibility study, and that we direct the staff to return with a finalized draft document for review and approval no later than the January 2025 board meeting.
I'll second that.
All right. We have a motion by Director Katie and a second by Director Jones. And all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you.
All right. So let's move on to board member reports. Does anybody have anything to report out?
I just wanted to say that it's quite possible that I will not be here any longer, that I will no longer be representing Blue Lake. So I just want to thank staff and board members for the time that we spent together, and we'll see what happens. There's a few votes left, and it can make a difference by just a few votes in a little town like Blue Lake. But anyway, this could possibly be my last meeting, so it's been a pleasure to work with all of you, and I thank you very much.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure to serve with you as well. Anybody else have anything to report out? All right. Director Keller-Heckman, do you have anything to report out?
Not at this time, Chair. Thank you.
Can I ask you, though, there's no meeting in December?
That is correct. Our next meeting will be January.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And with that, I will go ahead and adjourn. Thank you so much.